Paljor was an expert climber and very well liked by his peers, making him an obvious candidate for one of the Border Police's most ambitious missions to date. He was chosen to lead the first ever Indian ascent of Mount Everest. 12 years after joining the Border Police, Paljor said bye to his family, and he and the other hikers set out on their journey. At first, it went extremely well. The weather was perfect, but their luck would not hold. According to the official report on the ascent, those problems started on the morning of May 10th when Paljor and the other 3 climbers woke up late. Instead of leaving base camp at 3:30 a.m. like they were planning to, they didn't leave until 8 a.m., so 4.5 hours late. Making matters worse, the weather continued to deteriorate with a blizzard moving in, creating near zero visibility. But even under the best of circumstances, Mount Everest is still a force of nature. Since 1924, at least 300 people have died on Mount Everest. The extremely high altitude not only makes physical exertion extremely difficult, it affects your judgment and decision making, and not in a good way. Climbers and scientists have a name for the final half mile of Mount Everest. It's called the death zone because literally while you're up there, you're dying. Oxygen is so limited up there that your cells just begin to die. The conditions are so severe that people have died from exhaustion just standing in line waiting to reach the summit. But one of the biggest killers in the death zone is something called summit fever. When you get to that point in the climb, you are so close to reaching your goal. People will disregard safety and keep going on when really they should turn around and go back. Paljor and his 3 teammates were given strict orders to turn around at 3 p.m. if they had not reached the summit yet. But because of their late start, when 3 p.m. rolled around, they were not at the summit, they were in the death zone. One of the climbers who was with Paljor was the commander, and so at 3 p.m. when they were supposed to stop and turn around, he was at the very back of the climbing stack. And so he stopped and he yelled up to Paljor and the others and tried to get them to stop too so they could go back down, but either they didn't hear him or they just ignored him. And so the commander, after waiting for a few minutes, knew he had to go back down, and so he turned and began the descent. About 30 minutes later, the commander's radio crackled on again, and it was Paljor and the others, and they were informing him that they were going to make a push for the summit. They were about an hour away. And the commander said, "Stop, turn around, I'm ordering you to come back down. The weather is only getting worse." But whether they were suffering from summit fever or overconfidence, we don't know. But regardless, they refused. The commander just continued down the mountain. But 2.5 hours later, his radio crackled again, and this time it was Paljor and the others saying they had made it. They were standing on the summit of Mount Everest. The men had not just set a record for India, they had brought immeasurable honor to their country. The news sparked a huge celebration down in the base camp and also in the city of Leh, which is where the border police were located. But the party atmosphere would not last long. Shortly after the victory call, the weather turned from bad to horrible. What would later be known as the blizzard of 1996 had arrived in full fury, and by midnight that night, no one had heard from Paljor or the other 2 people he was with. And just a couple of days later, rescue climbers would confirm all 3 men had died. In the years following Paljor's death on the north base of Mount Everest, this hopeful and proud young Indian has become a sort of gruesome celebrity and landmark for the thousands of climbers that make it up into the death zone. Except now he's widely known not as Paljor, one of the first Indians to climb the north base of Mount Everest, but as Green Boots, which is a reference to the bright neon green boots he was wearing when he died. For more than 20 years, he's laid near the top of Mount Everest in a small limestone cave, wearing an orange parka and blue pants, and he's curled on his side with his arms wrapped around him like he's trying to keep himself warm. Since his death, anyone climbing the north face when the snow cover is light would literally have to step over his body to get to the top. But Paljor is not the only dead body on Mount Everest. There are over 200 other dead climbers littering the slopes of the world's highest peak. It's just too dangerous and too expensive to try to get them down, and so they stay wherever they died. Which means if you climb Mount Everest, you will literally be climbing over dead bodies on your way to the summit. But of all the bodies on Mount Everest, the most famous by far is Paljor. Here is an image of Paljor, aka Green Boots. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.